'Twas the night before Christmas. The Heights version. 'Twas the night before Christmas, and throughout the Heights, not a student was stirring. They were home for the night. The classrooms were empty, the hallways were bare, while visions of holidays danced through the air. Learning today, leading tomorrow. That's our way. And #The Heights Way guides us every single day. The teachers were home, their work put to rest, dreaming of moments when their students were best. Mrs. Coleman, our leader, reviewed in her mind the joy of her school, so caring and kind. Mrs. Heath and Mrs. Barnes had hearts full of cheer, reflecting on pre-K successes this year. Mrs. Cox, Miss Tucker, and Mrs. Sampson, too, thought of their kindergartners and all they could do. Miss Sterling and Mrs. Cole felt such pride at how their first graders took challenges in stride. Mrs. Outlaw and Miss Cowling, with smiles so bright, saw their second graders growing to new heights. Mrs. Taylor and Mrs. Howard knew it was clear. Third graders had blossomed in knowledge this year. Mrs. Hatfield and Mrs. Grice looked back with delight on how fourth graders' minds were taking flight. Ms. Ward and Mr. Kennedy, the fifth grade dream team, helped their students chase every goal and dream. Mr. Patterson brought music that sparked such delight, while Ms. Lawley's wove art into colorful sight. Coach Brown kept them dancing with rhythm and beat, and Coach Harris ensured they stayed quick on their feet. Mrs. Dickens empowered with tech-savvy skill. Her lessons were lively, engaging, and thrill. Mrs. Amanda greeted with kindness each day, while Ms. Dee Dee managed tasks in her way. Ms. Moya and Mrs. Martinez, ever so kind, helped families feel welcome, with care intertwined. Mrs. Bird offered wisdom when students felt low. With her guidance, they flourished and continued to grow. Mrs. Marler gave tools to unlock each word, and Mrs. Brown ensured every voice was heard. Mrs. Watts gave teachers support and direction, while Mrs. Howarth coordinated each test to perfection. Mrs. Dean Kuykendall and Mrs. Dunn lent their helping hands, working with students to meet learning demands. Mrs. Hawkins brought leadership for every need, helping our campus to grow and succeed. Mrs. Courtney, our nurse, brought care every day, helping with boo-boos and guiding the way. Mrs. Doe, Ms. Escobar, and Mrs. Bullard, so bright, guided gifted learners to reach every height. Ms. Leanne kept the building spotless and clean, her hard work a gift that was always seen. Mr. Danny, Ms. Brenda, and Ms. Gloria each day served meals with care in their own special way. Mrs. Robinette stacked books with a wink and a smile. Her library magic made reading worthwhile, and ensuring all was safe, steadfast, and right. Our resource officer Courtney kept watch day and night. Though the school was now quiet, its spirit remained. In every heart, its mission sustained. Then out in the sky there arose such a clatter. Mrs. Coleman looked up to see what was the matter. Away to the window, she moved in a flash, peering outside through the moonlight's soft splash, when what to her wondering eyes should appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer, with a little old driver, so lively and quick. She knew in a moment it must be Saint Nick. More rapid than eagles, his praises they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. To Heath, to Barnes, to Cox and Sampson, to Tucker and Sterling, your efforts are grand ones. To Cole, to Outlaw, to Cowling and Taylor, to Howard and Hatfield, your hearts never fail her. To Grice, to Ward, to Kennedy too, Patterson and Lawley's, the Heights honors you. To Brown, to Harris, to Dickens and more, to Amanda and Dee Dee who greet at the door, to Moya, to Bird and Watts by their side, to Marler and Brown whose compassion is wide, to Howarth, to Dunn and Dean Kuykendall too, to Hawkins, Courtney, the Heights thanks you. To Doe, to Escobar, to Bullard so bright, and our resource officer, who watches at night. Then he added, to Coleman and all who lead the way, your passion and drive light each school day. To the students of the Heights so bright and so kind, Merry Christmas to all. Leave no one behind. With a jingle of bells and a laugh full of might, he sprang to his sleigh and flew into the night. But we heard him exclaim, ere he drove out of sight, "Happy Christmas, the heights, and to all a good night."